Some of history's greatest military victories never involved a single battle. No swords, no bullets, no blood. Just cold, calculated strategy, and the enemy simply gave up. Genghis Khan conquered more land than any empire in history, and his secret weapon was not the Mongol cavalry. It was fear, manufactured, distributed, and weaponized before his armies even arrived. Every city that surrendered peacefully was spared. Every city that resisted was razed completely. Then the Khan made sure everyone within 500 miles heard the story. Refugees fled ahead of his advance, spreading panic like a plague. Merchants carried the news across trade routes. By the time the Mongol scouts appeared on the horizon, half the battle was already won. This is the oldest form of non-combat victory, psychological warfare. You do not need to defeat your enemy. You need to make them believe defeat is inevitable. The Romans understood this too. Before besieging a city, Roman commanders would offer formal terms: surrender now, keep your temples, keep your leadership, pay a tax, and live. Refuse, and the next city over would hear exactly what happened to you. The Roman military machine was genuinely terrifying, but the reputation did at least as much work as the legions themselves. In World War II, the Allied forces ran Operation Fortitude, a massive deception campaign designed to convince Germany that the D-Day invasion would land at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. Fake inflatable tanks. Fake radio traffic. A fictional army group supposedly commanded by General Patton. Hitler held his best panzer divisions at Calais for weeks after the actual landing at Normandy, waiting for an assault that never came. The real battle was already half won in his own mind. Psychological operations work because of one fundamental truth about human decision-making: people respond to perceived reality as much as actual reality. Control the narrative, and you control the outcome. The enemy does not need to be defeated. They need to believe they already are. In 1807, Napoleon issued the Continental System, a sweeping embargo designed to destroy Britain economically by cutting off all European trade with the island nation. No British goods would enter European ports. No European goods would reach Britain. Napoleon's logic was clean: if you cannot fight a navy, starve the economy that funds it. It almost worked. British merchants were panicking. Unemployment climbed. The government faced serious internal pressure. But Napoleon had made a critical miscalculation. He needed every European nation to comply perfectly, and they did not. Portugal refused immediately. Spain smuggled goods. Even Napoleon's allies cheated when the economic pain hit them hard enough. To enforce his own blockade, Napoleon invaded Spain and sparked a guerrilla war that bled his armies for 6 years. The strategy meant to avoid conflict created more conflict than any battle might have. But the underlying idea, using economic force as a weapon, is one of the most powerful non-combat tools in history. The British naval blockade of Germany during World War I is a more successful example. The Royal Navy systematically cut off German imports: fertilizer, food, rubber, metal. By 1917, German civilians were starving and industrial output was collapsing from the inside. The blockade killed an estimated 300,000 German civilians through malnutrition and disease. The war ended in 1918 partly because Germany's home front simply broke. Modern sanctions follow the same logic. Freeze a nation's foreign assets. Cut them off from the international banking system. Restrict their access to critical technology. The goal is to make the cost of continued conflict higher than the cost of negotiating peace. No army needs to cross a border. The pressure comes from every transaction that cannot happen. In the winter of 1812, Napoleon marched the Grande Armée into Russia with over 600,000 soldiers. It was the largest military force ever assembled in European history to that point. The Russian commander, Mikhail Kutuzov, looked at those numbers and made a decision that baffled his own generals. He refused to fight. Russian forces pulled back, then pulled back further. They burned crops. They destroyed supply depots. They emptied cities before the French arrived. Moscow itself, the spiritual heart of Russia, was abandoned and set ablaze. Napoleon rode into a gutted, empty city with no enemy to defeat and no peace treaty waiting on the table. He had won every engagement, and he was losing the war. The Russian strategy was never to beat Napoleon in the field. It was to make the Russian interior itself the weapon. Distance, winter, hunger. The French army began starving in October. By November, soldiers were eating their horses. The retreat from Moscow destroyed the Grande Armée without a decisive Russian victory anywhere on the map. This tactic has a name, Fabian strategy, after the Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus, who used it against Hannibal in 216 BC. Hannibal had just destroyed 2 Roman armies. Fabius refused to engage in pitched battle. He harassed supply lines. He cut off foraging parties. He watched and waited while Hannibal's army, far from home, dependent on what it could carry, slowly degraded. Roman politicians called Fabius a coward. He was later recognized as the man who saved Rome. Sometimes the most aggressive thing you can do is nothing. Let time, terrain, and logistics do the work. The enemy who cannot be engaged cannot win. In 1494, Pope Alexander VI drew a line across a map of the world and divided it between Spain and Portugal. The Treaty of Tordesillas gave each empire half the globe, codified in papal authority, and ended, before it could properly begin, what might have been a catastrophic naval war between 2 of the most powerful nations on earth. No battle, no casualties, just negotiation, and the world reshaped. The Cold War is the largest example of this in modern history. 2 superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, each capable of destroying civilization with nuclear weapons, spent 45 years not fighting each other directly. Proxy wars, espionage, arms races. But the core confrontation was managed through diplomacy, back channels, red telephone lines, and treaties like SALT I and II that placed hard limits on nuclear arsenals. Winston Churchill, in one of his less quoted lines, put it this way: to jaw is always better than to war. But diplomacy as a military tool is not just about avoiding war. It is about winning without it. Otto von Bismarck unified Germany through 3 short, calculated wars, but between and after each one, his diplomatic maneuvering isolated Austria, neutralized France's potential allies, and built a European order that left Germany dominant. He fought less than his contemporaries and gained more. The wars were almost beside the point. The diplomatic architecture around them was the real strategy. History's best commanders understood that warfare is politics by other means, as Clausewitz wrote, but the reverse is equally true. Politics, practiced well, is warfare by other means. The goal is the outcome, not the method. And the outcome achieved without fighting is almost always cheaper, faster, and more durable than the one paid for in blood. The greatest military minds in history often won before the first shot was fired. If you found this interesting, subscribe. There is a lot more where they came from.